Hello, my name is Sophia, and I am the Vice President of the Illinois 4-H Food Advocacy Team. And today I'm here as a part of the Four Things series to interview Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith is a sociologist and professor in the African American Studies Department at U of I. And today he'll be telling us a little bit about food justice. Dr. Smith, would you like to introduce yourself and your work?
Sure. Thank you, Sophia. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. Bobby J. Smith II. I am, as Sophia said, a professor here in African American Studies at the U of I. I do research on particularly Black communities and how communities use food justice as a way to address their food needs, as a way to address issues of food security, particularly in Black communities, but also in all communities around the nation.
It's really interesting. All right, so how would you define food justice?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked me this question because when we say the word food justice, it can bring up a number of things, and there's no consensus definition of food justice. But what we do know is that food justice is a concept. It is something that communities or a group of communities use to address their food needs. They come together to use agriculture and food as vehicles to address, understand, and remedy problems associated social, economic, cultural, racial, political, environmental problems that create food insecurity associated with the inability to access nutritious foods. These problems come from the food system, but also outside the food system. Therefore, when we place the concept or we place the word food in front of the word justice, we begin to have a conversation that seeks to understand how and why some communities are food secure and others are not. In many ways, it is an invitation to answer those questions, how and why some communities are food secure and others are not, to reveal the way in which our nation and the world's food system and agricultural systems fail to feed everyone. Everyone is not food secure. We recognize that, and that is what the concept food justice immediately recognizes. At the same time, food justice is about action and advocacy. It works to ensure that communities promote equity, fairness, inclusion, and community in the production, consumption, and distribution of food. So by placing the word food in front of the word justice, it's designed to bring people together in communities to have conversations about why do our neighbors not have access to food and we do? Why is there a grocery store in our community and not in another person's community? Why is it that one community has an abundance of access to grocery stores, farmers markets, gardens, and urban farms, and other communities don't? So the concept of food justice invites us into a conversation that ensures that everyone has abundant access to food.
That's really fascinating. All right, so how did you personally first become interested in food justice?
Yeah, how did I get involved in food justice? So I've been doing food justice work for almost 10 years now. So I'll give a little bit of my own background, and then I can talk about how I came to food justice. So I studied agriculture in undergrad. So I went to a historically Black college in Texas called Prairie View A&M University. And that's where I studied agriculture, focused on agricultural economics. And that was one of the first times I'd ever been exposed to the study of ag, the study of food. And in taking classes on dairy science, animal nutrition, a number of classes, I began to learn about the food system. My senior year in college, we learned about issues of local food systems. So today, Sophia, as you know, the term local food systems is thrown around everywhere. Like you hear it all the time. How do we localize our food system? 12 years ago, that was not a conversation. It was an emerging conversation. So many people were talking about local food, but the USDA actually released one of their first research reports in 2010 to address food traceability. Know your farmer, know your food. Where does your food come from? I took a class my senior year in college called Food Traceability. And it was the first time I thought critically about food from the farm, from the soil to our plate, to it being disposed and recycled. And when I took that class, I was fascinated about this whole move towards where does our food come from? But my professor at the time, Dr. Parks, also let us know that food traceability and local food systems weren't new terms. They weren't new ways of thinking. some 50, 60, 70 years ago, majority of people access food in their own community. There wasn't this large transportation system that got oranges from Florida or apples from New York that could be placed in grocery stores all around the nation. So in that class, I learned about local food systems, and then I went to graduate school and I studied local food systems as well as a master's student. I went to Cornell University in New York, in Ithaca, New York. Ithaca, New York is one of the most fascinating local food scenes in our nation. They've been devoted to the production of local foods for at least the last 4 decades. So to study local food systems in a place like Ithaca was was a very good place for me to be in. But while I was studying local foods there, I began to get more involved with community-based food systems. And it was in community-based food system conversations that I learned about the social justice side of food systems. That's where food justice comes in. It's saying that we have to begin to recognize that everyone, as I said before, my definition, does not have the same level of access to food as other people do. So when I learned about this new language around food justice, I had never heard it before. So I was fascinated by it. So I started doing, I was a graduate student. So I started doing more research on the concept. I started reading more books. And I started there was a large growing conversation among multiple communities from Chicago to Detroit, Michigan, to South Bronx, New York, to Washington, D.C., Jackson, Mississippi, Dallas, Texas, Oakland, California. There's like this national conversation about food justice and how do we ensure that everyone has adequate access to food. And that's how I learned about it. I started hanging out with local farmers. At the time, there was a Black farmer named Rafael Aponte that I got to know, and I learned about his work in Ithaca. And he introduced me to this conversation around food justice. And that's how I got into it. And then I learned that there was a way that I could study it in graduate school. There's a way that I could create my own project around, is this a new concept? Is it new? Is it old? And while the language and the concept food justice is new, for sure, the work around addressing problems in the food system is not new. So we call it food justice now, but communities have been doing this work for many, many years. In particular, as you know, Sophia, I'm in an African American Studies department. So in particular, Black communities have been doing this kind of work for decades. But the work, again, the work is about localizing food systems. But at the time, for the past few decades, we've been thinking about how to create this national food system. How do we create, this global food system? And while that is important, there are impacts that globalized and local and national food systems do to communities. There are ways that communities end up being impacted by these larger food systems that create inadequate access to food. So I got into food justice as something to study when I was in graduate school, but I have a background in agriculture. I studied agriculture in undergrad, as well as I come from a legacy of Black farmers in the South. I come from a legacy of people who worked the land, who believed in local food systems. My mother grew up, on a farm. My father grew up on a farm till he turned 7 and moved to a city. So farming and food and agriculture and local production has always been a part of my life. It didn't become a part of studying or a part of something that I could research until I became a student in undergraduate and then graduate school.
Awesome. So how can young people interested in food justice learn more?
Yeah, so read. The first thing is reading. There's so much out there. One way I see, so a lot of young people have Instagram and Twitter. There's a large conversation on Instagram and Twitter. You can follow hashtags, hashtag food security, hashtag food justice, hashtag anything around food, and you begin to see this larger conversation about how are other communities thinking about food justice and food security. How do they get involved? One is through programs like 4-H. Programs like through cooperative extension, those programs that go into communities to address the reasons why communities are food insecure, don't have adequate access to food. Getting involved in those kind of groups and recognizing that food justice looks different in each community. Some communities only have social problems. Some have social and racial problems. All communities for sure have environmental problems, whether it's through climate change, whether it's through the land, whether it's through soil issues. But how you get involved is first by reading and learning about how other communities are doing this work. Second way you get involved is by recognizing, how does food insecurity show up in your community? If you're in a rural area, is it that you don't have a grocery store, or is it that you want to have more, or do you want to support more farms who grow fresh fruits and vegetables and produce? So you get involved by looking first in your community. There's always this big conversation, Sophia, about sending youth and young people to other communities, to other countries to address issues of food, not recognizing that your neighbor could possibly be food insecure. So I always push students, or always challenge students, if you will, to first look into your community and think about how does food, well, first, the first question is, how do you access food in your community? You know, thinking about the school system, are a lot of the students in your school systems, are a lot of them on free and reduced lunch? And you can learn a lot about that through going to community council meetings, getting involved in local government, because a lot of the food problems that we have are associated with the ways in which the local communities operate. So the first way to get involved is to read. Again, and you can read, I'm not saying get a lot of books, you can read on your social media feed. There's a larger conversation on social media, and a lot of students, young people are on social media, so you get it that way. But then also go outside, walk around your own community, go into your grocery stores. Are there culturally appropriate foods there? Are there foods that you actually want to eat, or is there an abundance of cheap and highly processed foods? Is it easier to get chips in your community, or is it easier to get fresh produce? These are the kind of questions you begin to ask, because then you become an advocate. And these are action steps. I'm really big on thinking about action steps that students can. You can read about food justice all day, food security, but it's really important to go into your community to see, how does food move in my community? The reason why I bring that up, Sophia, also is because we recognize that you and I are having a conversation via Zoom, via a virtual capacity, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has also impacted the ways in which food moves. If you remember this time last year, grocery store shelves were empty. They were bringing in boxes of food into rural communities because people needed access to food and they couldn't get out how they wanted to, because they had to be able to protect themselves from the virus, protect themselves from getting sick. So we recognize that COVID-19 has amplified a number of issues that were already going on in communities. So if you live in a community where there was no grocery store, and you remember how hard it was to access food pre-COVID, and now you see how hard it is now, what can you do about that? Should we organize our own farmers market? Should we find ways to work with other communities that have their own, produce their own food, their own produce and things like that? So I think that's how you get involved, is one, by going outside, two, by reading, but then also being involved in groups like you are, Sophia, where you all have conversations. You're a part of a food advocacy group, food action group. What are the actions you all are taking across the state? Recognizing that food insecurity looks different in Cook County with Chicago versus East St. Louis versus Southern Illinois versus here where I'm at in Champaign County. Things look different. So how do we build across communities, but begin within our own community?
Perfect. Thank you so much. And you actually answered my last question, the fourth of the four things, which was, what are actionable ways that young people can get involved in working in food justice? So thank you so much for your time, Dr. Smith. This has been a really great interview. I'm just going to wrap this up with a few reminders. The Illinois 4-H Food Action Summit is coming up next week. Dr. Smith, I believe, is presenting. Our new round of food advocacy grants, so grants to fund those food justice projects, like Dr. Smith suggested, will be opening up mid-May. And then also the Illinois 4-H Food Advocacy Team is accepting applications starting July 1st. So we'd love to see you there. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.